Good morning, subscribers. In recent days, I have been looking at this whole notion of labour market theory. So this is for year 13 and year 2 A-level economics, obviously focusing on the micro side of things. And I was just searching through my channel and I realised I didn't have a video on transfer earnings and economic rent. So I'm going to push one out to you now, ladies and gents. So let's get to it. We've been looking at the equilibrium wage in the labour market, particularly focusing on the perfectly competitive labour market. And then we move on, of course, and we consider, well, why do people earn more than others? And that has been quite prevalent in the news media of late. So there are two reasons, as economists, as you well know, why individuals, maybe public servants and public sector workers, why they earn substantially less than, for example, a pop star or a footballer or a musician or something like that. And that is to do with this whole notion of the difference between transfer earnings and economic rent. So what is the difference between the two? Transfer earnings are the minimum payment required to bring a factor of production into employment. So the way to think about transfer earnings is that really it's all the points along the supply curve. Those are the minimum payments required to bring somebody in. So for example, in this diagram, to bring the first unit of labour, Q1, into the employed sector, the amount of wage that they would require would obviously be there. Now, if that person earns over and above that, all well and good, but the minimum payment required is where we are just kissing the supply curve of labour. Similarly, to bring the second unit of labour in, again, it's the minimum, it's the point on the supply curve of labour. And anything over and above that really is a bit of a bonus in that respect. So that's what we mean by transfer earnings, the bare minimum. What then do we mean by economic rent? Well, economic rent is, as you probably have guessed, anything over and above that minimum payment required. So in this particular diagram here, you can see that Q star workers are paid W star wages. Well, if they're paid W star, but the first unit of labour only requires, this is the minimum to bring them into employment, but actually they're getting W star, then of course that's a payment over and above the minimum. And so that distance there, ladies and gentlemen, between here and here, that is our component of economic rent. And as you can see, as we move along here, the amount of economic rent per worker is dropping off because the minimum required per worker is going up all the time as the supply curve slopes upwards. So we can now see on this diagram that in this instance, this entire section here, that is all transfer earnings, and this section here, which is above the supply curve, that is all economic rent. So how does that change as particularly the supply curve of labour changes? And remember, supply of labour, we're really talking about skills, length of time it takes to train for a particular occupation, and so on. So if you imagine the supply curve of labour pivoting around like so if we were to move this around and start to pivot it around like that, then obviously what happens is the amount of economic rent is getting bigger, so the economic rent would now be all of that sector, and the amount of transfer earnings is getting smaller because the amount of transfer earnings is now moving to that smaller section. So we can see here that as the supply of labour moves in this direction, as it pivots around, as it becomes more inelastic, and you know that factors which cause that to become more inelastic are to do with length of training, qualifications, etc. Well, the amount of economic rent is going up. So let's consider a couple of extreme measures as identified usually in your textbook. So here we have one where the supply of labour is perfectly elastic. So the skill set required for this particular job is very minimal because this is pretty much saying that anybody, just ask somebody to do this job and pretty much anybody could do it. Well, to bring the first unit of labour to the market, Q1, the minimum is here. But of course, that's exactly what they're being paid. They're being paid the minimum. To bring the next unit of labour, the minimum is here. And again, that's exactly what they're being paid. And so actually, in this particular example, this entire area here, that's all transfer earnings, because nobody's getting anything over and above the minimum required. Let's then consider the other extreme, where somebody has a very unique skill. So musician, pop star, actor, that type of thing. So here we have the supply curve of labour for somebody who's got a very unique talent. What's that bloke called? Ted Sheeran. Very unique talent, as you can see, perfectly inelastic supply curve of labour actually. Now this in effect is saying that for this person to work, they'll supply their labour even if they get no money. And we often hear, particularly professional footballers, talk about the fact that they would work for nothing. For the love of the game, they would do what they do for nothing. Now maybe that's easy to say when you're on a £10 million a year annual contract, but that's what they're saying anyway. And that's what this diagram is showing us. At a wage of 0, that amount of labour will be supplied. And so the minimum they need is nothing, really. And so anything over and above the minimum is all economic rent. And so this entire area here, because it's all over and above the minimum payment required, then that is all ER, that's all economic rent. So when it comes to explaining why pop stars, musicians, famous people with very unique skills and talents, why they earn so much money, one of the reasons is obviously to do with the very unique skill that they have, which makes their supply of labour very inelastic. But let's not forget, ladies and gentlemen, they're only earning that money because there is a demand for what they're doing. People want to go and watch Ted Sheeran. They want to go and listen to Kevin Bridges, the comedian, whatever it may be. So let's not forget the importance of demand here, because you could have a very unique skill, but nobody's interested. So that if the demand was limited, then the amount of economic rent that you would earn would obviously also be very low. So it would be down here somewhere, and so your wage would be much lower. So these people are earning substantial sums because we know that we want to go and see them because they're unique. And so the demand curve, you can imagine how far up this supply curve of labour the demand curve is. My all-time favourite guitar player, Mr. Slash, aka Saul Hudson, born in Stoke-on-Trent, a founding member of Guns N' Roses, as you may know. Well, the demand for that man's labour is so high, they pack out stadiums night after night after night, just finishing a 2-year Not In This Lifetime tour, and consequently, they earn substantial economic rent and substantial money. So don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, there's no point having a unique skill or talent if there's no demand for it. Okay, and then let's finally consider something which is often talked about. I'll just move the camera around slightly. Something which is often talked about. Let's just zoom in here a little bit. To do with, again, just considering why these people earn what they do. Considering the importance of the job that they do. Because there is a little bit of a paradox here, isn't there? So musicians earning millions, public servants earning tens of thousands, in spite of the fact that doctors, teachers, nurses and so on, they do a very vital job, don't they? Even our Prime Minister, Mrs. May, I don't know exactly what her annual salary is, but probably around about 150,000, something like that. Doing a very, very important, very difficult job. So there is that paradox, isn't there, and it's worth considering, in terms of the relative importance of their jobs. But why is it that public servants are paid less than these people? Well, again, it all comes back to this notion of elasticities and demand. So the skill set, not everybody can be a rock star. Lots of people can, relatively speaking, train to be a doctor or a nurse. It's easy to measure, so the marginal revenue, marginal product, the marginal revenue product, we've just been looking at that. It's easy to measure the output of a famous musician. People, particularly public servants, sometimes, and you well know this I'm sure from your studies of economics, difficult to measure the output in the public sector. And again, that's a limiting factor with regard to wages and salaries. And then again, the relative demand to see or to hear or to seek the services of these people. Well, the relative demand for nurse or doctor or teacher relative to the demand for a famous pop star musician, again, that has a limiting factor on the salaries in the public sector relative to those who are very skilled, very unique in their talents. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that's been useful. If you've got to the end of this, thank you for watching right through to the end. If you're a first-time viewer, please do subscribe below. Do follow me, geekonomics.co.uk, also on Twitter, @G_Conomics. And if you have any questions that you'd like me to answer, then you can contact me via my webpage, geekonomics.co.uk/contact. And I always try to get back to anybody who messages me on that. So that's it for now, ladies and gentlemen, and see you with the next update. Bye for now.